Hi everyone and welcome to this gouache painting tutorial. Today we'll paint this simple, bright colored scenery with a cat and some yellow fall leaves. And let's get started right away. I'm using an art sketchbook by Etchr Labs, which has watercolor paper in it. Since we are working with gouache paints, I would say that any thicker paper will do the job, and when it comes to the paints, any brand of gouache paints will work perfectly fine. You also don't need to own these exact colors I'm using in the video, but I'll show them here nevertheless and list all the main colors used throughout the video as well. But before starting the painting process, I thought we could add a few guidelines for ourselves with a pencil. So first we'll need to decide where the line of the roof is, which in my picture is about 1/3 above the bottom edge. I also added some lines for the roof tiles and then roughly sketched the size and placement of the cat in the picture. But something to remember is that most of these lines will be covered with the first layers of paint, so we can save all the more detailed sketching for a little bit later. But now that our few guidelines are in place, it's time to start with the actual painting, and we're gonna start here by painting the sky. I used these two blue tones and a white paint for it. So this first light blue has a slightly purple undertone, which was not what I wanted for this picture. So I decided to mix a small amount of this mint green shade to get more of a bright sky blue tone. Then you can add as much white in the mixture as you want. I actually wanted the top part of the sky to be slightly darker in tone, so there will be this very slight gradient effect here. I think often creating this type of gradient makes the end result look slightly less flat compared to painting the sky with one tone throughout. But if you feel like one tone would work better for you, that would be perfectly fine as well. So as you can see, I kind of kept adding this white paint to the mixture and just swipe the color to the paper using this bigger flat brush, which in my opinion is the easiest way to get a smooth surface for a big area like this. If you feel like your gradient doesn't look smooth or there are some very visible brush strokes in there, what I usually like to do to smooth those out is take a little bit of the paint off my brush and smooth out some of those strokes with just a little bit of water in my brush. Or you could also add some of the lighter tone and kind of sweep that mixture all across the top part, which will make all the colors almost melt into each other a little bit better. I also ended up covering almost half of the cat, which doesn't matter because we can easily fix it later by painting on top of the edges. But after I was happy with the sky part, I took out the remaining two darker tones. So this other one is a pure black, and then we have a Prussian blue shade, which is just a very dark, slightly grayish tone blue. And I just went ahead and started to mix this little bit darker tone using this sky blue as the base for this new color. I sometimes get questions asking why I mix colors on this same small palette, and most of the times the answer is that I'm simply too lazy to reach out for a different palette. And I also think that sometimes you can definitely use the colors you have already used before and create new tones and mixtures without needing to always reach for your painting tubes for new fresh colors. This is also a great way to learn how to mix different colors, which I think is one of the most important things when it comes to painting in general. So what I would advise, especially if you are more on the beginner side, is just to have a big palette next to you that you can use to mix and experiment with different tones. But here I wanted this darker, little bit more grayish green tone almost that we're gonna use as the base for the roof. So this is just for the base layer, and then we will start adding all the details on top of this one after this has completely dried. So my goal was to keep this roof part of the picture as simple as possible because I didn't want us to use too much time on this. So when we have the background layer in place, it's pretty easy for us now to mix a slightly darker and lighter tone using that base color as our starting point. And then we're starting to add just some simple lines to indicate some shadows and highlights in the roof part. I think the most eye-catching part here are these roof tiles that I just created with these pretty sloppy strokes, and after adding a layer with the darker color, I then followed the same thing by using a lighter color to add a small highlight on the roof tiles as well. I was also experimenting here by adding a little bit of texture. So I mixed a little bit more water with my light color and then just kind of went over the background layer, which creates this very light, more translucent layer on top of it. And I think it created a little bit more texture into the surface. I think if you wanted to make this even more realistic in the end, this might be a good technique to use. I think with gouache paints, it's often very easy to end up using smooth colors because that often feels very intuitive way to use the paints, but that doesn't mean that we are not able to create these more textured surfaces as well. You just need to switch up the amount of water you're using a little bit. Anyway, I kept adding a little bit more of these darker shadows into the roof tiles. And after that, we can move on to the rest of the picture. And now it's time to start painting the cat. So since the cat was pretty much covered with the sky paint, I started this step by just sketching on top of the first layer of paint with my pencil. These lines will be covered as well, and I personally think that having a sketch underneath just makes the painting process much easier. So what we are trying to do here is to get the whole posture of the cat look like something we can easily use as our guide while adding the colors. This is one of those steps where having a reference picture will help you a lot. I was using this random cat picture as my reference for painting this specific angle. But after this sketch, I took out all the brown colors I showed you in the beginning. And these are the colors we're gonna mainly use for this cat part. So I started with these dark brown tones. I also mixed a little bit black into the mixture to get this grayish brown tone here. I tried my best to keep this furry look here. So instead of painting very solid shapes, I was using these tapping motions throughout this whole cat part, and it will create this little bit fluffier, uneven look. But again, this is definitely not the only way of painting cats. I think something a little bit more cartoony would perfectly fit this picture as well. So it really depends on your personal preference. Something I found a little bit difficult was to make the outlines of the cat stand out against the background. So especially this white part of the fur was kind of blending to the background. So I added these small darker strokes along the white area to differentiate the fur from the sky. I don't know if I did the best job here, but I think this is definitely one of those things that I find more difficult while painting. So sometimes, even if the colors are different, if they are in the same tone of lightness, they might still very easily blend together. So that's when we need to use some different tricks to get the different colors show up clearly against one another. Anyway, when I was finally happy with how this cat was turning out, the last part of this painting are the hanging leaves. So here I started by first painting the dark branches. I felt a little bit more confident first sketching them out slightly with the pencil, so I kind of knew where to place all the strokes. It might be a little bit intimidating to go over the smooth background with this very dark color. So what I find helpful when creating these very thin strokes is, first of all, using the smallest brush you have, and then the second thing is using pretty dry paint. So this is not a place to saturate your brush with the paint and water, but rather just tap your brush very lightly into the dark color, which makes it much easier to create these very thin, almost broken strokes, which usually fits pretty well for tree branches. And also using very angular, straight lines might be better than curvier, smoother lines. But after the branches are in place, now it's time to start painting the leaves. So for this step, I finally took out the yellow paint and started to just make these yellow spots all across the branches. Again, I used a very thick paint mixture here so that this yellow would look as bright as possible in the picture. And I was trying to go with these almost fan-shaped ginkgo leaves. And I think usually when painting leaves, it's good to make some unevenness by making groups of leaves and then leaving some parts of the branches a little bit more bare. I find that it often makes trees look a little bit more realistic rather than placing the leaves very symmetrically and evenly across the branches. After the first layer of the yellow shade, I decided to also go over the outlines of these leaves with this very light color. So this is almost pure white, just a little bit yellow mixed in it. And I feel like it made these leaves again stand a little bit better against the background. And it also made this almost highlight halo to the leaves. Then lastly, I took this darker color and added a small dot to the center of the leaves, which I think again made them stand out a little bit better against the background. But after that, we are pretty much done with the painting. So at this point, you can remove the tapes from the borders and then add some final fixes and touches to the painting if you feel like it needs it. I added just a few darker leaves here and there, but after that we are finally done with our prideful scenery. I really hope you enjoyed this painting and maybe learned a new technique or two. If you decide to try this out, let me know how it went for you in the comments. I always love to hear if you decide to try out the paintings yourself. And if this was your first time around here and you want to stay tuned for more painting and journaling stuff in the future, definitely consider subscribing. But that's it for our small painting practice for today. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you're having an amazing day or night wherever you are, and see you in my next one. Bye bye!